Hi, Rich Munson from the site Tensoku. I wanted to explore Kihonteki Nidan a little bit more fully. I want to talk a little bit about stances, timing, and some essential skills you should begin to incorporate into the form as you perform it. We'll begin with stances. In Kihonteki Nidan, there's a definite pattern to the stance work. When you're using the front hand to strike, you'll be in Sochidachi. When you're using the backhand to strike, you'll be in Zenkusudachi. Pretty simple. You alternate back and forth in a lot of cases. You'll rotate pretty consistently from Sochidachi into Zenkusudachi and then back to Sochidachi. There are a couple of examples where you don't rotate back and forth between strikes, but that's a pretty consistent pattern throughout the form. The second thing I wanted to talk about regarding stances is stance depth. You'll want to try to work at varying stance levels so that you're not doing it always at a high level or always at an intermediate level. You'll also want to do it at a very low level. Now, nobody fights from a stance where you're down here. It's just not practical. However, that's very good for building leg strength, and that's a fundamental skill you're going to require at some point in your Tensoku training. So begin working now on trying to develop strong legs. Do this form every fifth or sixth time in a fairly low stance. You'll appreciate it later when you rely on really strong legs. So sometimes do the stance, the form rather, down here. Sometimes do it up about here. Sometimes do it up here. From a higher level, it's more realistic from a fighting perspective, so do it sometimes up there. Do it at all different levels. You'll appreciate the experience of trying it in different ways. So work on different stances throughout the form as you're practicing it. The last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was some of the transitions in this form can seem a little awkward. So if you've just finished this sequence, you step all the way around to angle 6, that can be a bit awkward to some people sometimes. So one of the ways that you can deal with that is to cheat. And the way you cheat is to put an intervening Hisokudachi in there. That'll make it much easier to get around. So when you're here, as you step around, step into Hisokudachi, and then back to Sochidachi in this case. It's a transitional step. It's not something you're going to hold. You're never really even going to be in the stance. You're just going through the stance. So you're coming from here, through the stance, and back over here. So that transitional stance work can work not only in this form, but in others where you're having some transitional difficulty. It works a lot. So anyway, that's a bit about stances. Now let's move on to timing. When students first learn this form, they develop a striking pattern that goes something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they strike with one side, then the other side, then the first side again, and work their way through the form in that manner. And that's fine. That's how you have to learn the kata. It's a fairly long, somewhat more complex kata with a great deal of hand striking in it. So it takes a little while to understand what strikes go where. And so you wind up doing the kata in that kind of a pattern. But once you become confident in the form and how you perform it, then you want to start changing the timing. And one of the fundamental ways that you can change the timing is to slow everything way down. And I'm talking about going about 10% of normal speed. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you might want to be going something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That allows you to pay very close attention to every aspect of your anatomy and what's going on. Are your feet in the right position? Or is your center properly aligned? Is your strike elevation proper? You can't notice those things if you're doing it very quickly. So you'll only pick them up if you go very, very slowly. Slow it down sometimes. Practice it looking for minor details that you can improve. That's how you get better in pretty much everything you do in the martial arts. You'll go through things very quickly sometimes and completely ignore some fundamental things that maybe you should pick up. But the only real way you can pick them up is to do things very slowly. So in this form, begin to do that. Slow things down sometimes, every 5 or 6 times you do the kata. Slow it way down so you get a sense of what you might improve. The second thing about timing is to vary that cadence. So instead of that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of a cadence, you can change that up so that you're striking maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By varying that timing, you get much better combinational striking skills, which is something you'll want to develop. You don't want to have, just the sense of striking. You want to be able to put things together. So put things together in a combination, work through that, you try various combinations. Eventually you want to get to a point where you never do the kata the same way twice. You work through the kata and vary the timing every time. Every time you change to a different angle, think of a different timing pattern. It's a pretty simple form to do that, and it's very good at teaching you some combinational fighting skills. So work with it and try to get those skills. It's a very nice form for doing that. Next thing I wanted to cover was skills. You're being introduced to a large number of skills, and you want to begin to incorporate those skills into your kata and other work that you do. The first skill I want to talk about is rotational delivery. So as you're striking, particularly in strikes that are involving the fist, like Tensoku, you want to think about employing a method where the strike is rotating as it comes in. So that rotational delivery concept that you'll read about in your curriculum material is something you can apply in this form and should begin to apply in this form. The advantage of rotational delivery is it forces your elbow to stay down. So as the strike comes in, your elbow stays down, and that allows you to hit with these two large knuckles. If your elbow flares out, this hand trajectory is going to cause you to impact the two smaller knuckles, which are more likely to break than the two larger knuckles. So look at and study rotational delivery and try to incorporate that into this form where it's appropriate. It's not appropriate for every hand strike in this form, but it often is, and you should begin to explore when and where you can use that. The next skill I want to talk about is disproportionality. So when you're striking, you want your strike to return more quickly than it went out. So if you strike at this speed, it should come back a little bit more quickly. If you strike at this speed, it should come back even more quickly. So disproportionality is the concept that you pull something back at a different speed than it went out. It has other connotations, but for this form, that's the primary one. As you pull that hand back, it can also help accelerate the delivery of a secondary strike. So if you strike here and pull back quickly, it can accelerate the delivery of the second strike. So there's a benefit in a multi-strike scenario where returning the first hand benefits delivery of the second one. So explore disproportionality and try to incorporate that in this form, not necessarily in every strike, but there are certainly times when you can put things together and employ disproportionality. The next thing I want to talk about is centering and your center triangle. So you want to have your strikes delivered in your center. So you don't want them being delivered off of your shoulder so that they're in line with your shoulder. They should be in line with your center. All your strikes should be right along your center line. They should also be ideally along your center triangle, so you're striking more here than out here. Now that doesn't mean that striking out here is bad or that you should never do it. There are certainly times when you do want to do that. If you're trying to keep somebody away from you, then you're going to be punching out here, trying to keep them at some distance. And sometimes you just have an opportunity to strike somebody at a long distance. But normally when you're engaging somebody, you're going to be at a distance for a moment, and then things are going to come in close. And when you're in close, you want those strikes to be right within your center triangle. That way you're allowing your body to help deliver that form, that strike rather, and it'll have much more impact than something that's just the arm by itself. Eye training is another essential thing to consider. Often students begin to follow their own hand, watching what the hand is doing. You want to get out of that habit right away. When you're fighting with somebody, they'd like you to watch their hand. So what you want to do is get a broader view, so you're looking from a very broad perspective and not in a focused manner. If you're looking at your hand, the thing you see is your hand and not much else. You won't notice somebody's friend sneaking up on you. You won't notice your opponent faking with his hand so he can kick you with a foot. So those things aren't very noticeable if you're focused on your hands. Don't look at your hands. Keep your eyes pretty wide. That's pretty much it for the skills. You do want to look through your curriculum material and see what else you might find in this applicable to this form. There's a lot that is. These are the fundamental things you want to be considering, but look at everything else and see how it might apply to your execution and performance of this form. Last thing I thought I'd cover is how to do this form on your ranking examination. We're not looking for you to do anything particularly extraordinary. We're just looking for you to have the proper strikes in the proper order with the correct octagon angles, thinking about strike position, keep things in your center, have the proper elevation for your strikes. Not looking for too much more than that. We appreciate people who can put things together in some combinational manner, but that's not essential. We're really looking for, do you have the fundamental pattern down? That's the fundamental thing we're after. If you can do that, as you've done it in your class, you should do fine on the exam. So don't get too lost in details. Just work on the fundamental skills, fundamental angles, elevations, what strikes are done in what order. If you have all that down, you should do fine on your ranking exam. Thank you for watching.